Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Policy Wall with ORF Middle East. From Dubai, I'm joined with Dr. Nir Boms, who's a research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. He's also the chairman of the Syria Research Forum and the Gulf Israel Policy Forum. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
Doctor, I'd like to talk to you about the recent events in Syria. And I want to start with what's happening in Suweida. The ceasefire announced on July 19 was meant to calm things down, but fighting hasn't really stopped. Why hasn't it held, and what does that tell us about the bigger picture in Syria right now?
It's good to be here again, and thank you for this hospitality. Of course, we've had a very difficult week in Syria. And for those who are from Syria and work on Syria, of course, we paid a lot of attention to this. And I say this not just a researcher, but also as somebody who is involved in the efforts to try to bring calm, not just to Suweida, but also to the relationship between Syria and Israel and in the region at large. I think what we've seen in Syria was a combination of factors that led to a conflagration, and that unfortunately provided the platform for the more radical elements in a number of camps to come together. In Suweida, what began a week prior as a local confrontation and a dispute that is not new between some groups that otherwise have been working on sometimes some of them on smuggling routes and who have, in the context of the new reality emerging in Syria now, need to refine their place. Rivalries between Druze networks and Bedouin networks have been there for quite some time, although the broader relationship with the Druze and the Syrian community were peaceful. What happened in Suweida, that following an initial conflict, the government intervened and sent the force to calm things down. That force that was sent under the Ministry of Defense was not trained as an intervention force that's supposed to calm things down. On the contrary, they send, unfortunately, some people who were not trained as police officers and actually brought the type of militia behavior that we have seen, unfortunately, with these pictures and videos. Yeah. That created another part of a confrontation that prompted a group from the Druze community to go and respond. Okay. And that actually brought even more killings. And following that and the convoy that was ambushed, there was more Bedouins and tribes that brought really to offer revenge. Okay. That created a whole cycle of confrontations, and the tragic part of it, which is not just tragic, it is also unfortunate, that a lot of it was done under the at least official auspices of Syrian Minister of Defense or the new security forces. Which brings us to two questions. Was this intentional, or is it a sign of lack of control by the government of Syria? We can get into it a little bit, yeah. But I would just say broadly that I think that the intention of many in Syria is not to see that, not to have that type of dynamic, because that dynamic is going to pull Syria apart and dismantle Syria together. There are many people in Syria that we know that are working to actually bring Syria together, dismantle these militias, and work to bring some deconfliction.
And unity and peace. And I think we all saw the images and videos of the violence that has occurred over the past few weeks. And I think, which brings me to my next question, which is kind of, some say Israel's recent strikes were about protecting the Druze community. Others say it was about reassuring, for example, the Israeli Druze communities at home. What do you make of these arguments? What's your take on that point of view?
Following the transition in government in Syria and the ascension of Ahmed Ashara, which came following really a 14-year-old Syrian war.
Yes.
And from an Israeli perspective, close to 2 years of war in Gaza that created fronts, that Syria was one of them.
Yes.
Israelis were naturally skeptics of any developments in Syria. We've given clear messages to the Syrians and some red lines. And we've asked that weapons is not going to come closer to the border, a weapon that can potentially threaten Israel. We've asked for demilitarization. And we've also said and stated that the issue of minorities is important to us, partially because we have some relationship with these communities. It's not a secret that Israel has a very strong Druze community, and that this community has very strong relationship with the community, the Druze community on the other side. But it's also because of a broader point. If you want to see how a country treats its people and whether it's going to be more pragmatic, broadly speaking, show me how it treats its minorities and show me how it treats its women. It's very clear that if we've seen militias who call the name of God in order to kill Druze heretics, we understand what that approach and what these types of people with the same types of Toyota trucks would do if they were to get closer to the Israeli border. These are not the people that we wish to see as our neighbors. So these two issues converged.
Okay.
When the events began to unfold, Israel felt compelled to respond. Unfortunately, some of this became also an internal issue in Israel. The Druze community had mobilized very quickly. The Druze leadership had called for action. We ended up having over 1,000 Druze crossing the border, some of them with weapons, saying we want to join the fight. Israel felt it needs to respond, and it did. And in some ways, it also had able to not necessarily de-escalate, but at least prevent some of what was developing into a massacre.
And just on that point, while some of the strikes appeared to become precision strikes against some of these forces that were in Suweida, others were near Damascus or in Damascus. And was that some sort of message in your view, a deterrent or warning? What was Israel trying to signal with the Damascus strikes?
I think Israel was trying to signal two things. It was trying to signal to Ashara that it's serious, and it's trying to signal that Ashara needs to take charge and responsibility for this. I am not sure that I would advocate for this type of policy. I've been public and on other routes of policy that could have been pursued. I believe that if we zoom out, our interest is actually for Ashara to succeed, not to fail. I also believe that if we want to provide and help protection for the Druze community, this cannot be done just by F-35s and precision strikes. That may be able to stop a particular danger that is imminent, looking at the Toyota trucks and tribes that are being mobilized to attack Suweida. But in the medium and certainly in the long term, the Druze will need to live in Syria. And they need to live as a minority in Syria, and they will need to live as Syrians. So we need to do more, not just from the Israeli side, to encourage the types of deconfliction and reconciliation, because otherwise there is no way to provide defense or send two Israeli divisions to occupy the south of Syria and defend the Druze kinetically. I think that what we all need to do now, coming from the Syrian leadership for sure, which remember that these militias came from Syria and under the auspices of the Syrian defense forces. It's first and foremost a failure of command and control and potentially even intent.
Yeah.
But we need to work with the Syrian government and with other stakeholders to make sure that we are finding solutions that this is not going to happen again.
And in the spirit of working with the Syrian government, how has Ahmed al-Shar's government kind of responded to these strikes on a diplomatic level, at least from what appears to be from his speech that followed the recent events in Suweida? How do you analyze his language?
Ahmed al-Shar's language, since its coming to power, has been careful and in many ways constructive. I think we had noted that he had called Israel by name, something that has not been the case for the decades that passed before with the Assads. He had spoken about a vision that includes the power sharing, minority rights. He spoke about the vision of peace. And I have been involved with some people related to the circle and the engagements to know that some of that was really intended. But Ashara is not the only person in Syria. And here you have to look at the intent and the ability. You know that in theory, there's not much difference between theory and practice. But in practice, there is. It's not going to be enough to say that we are going to guard the rights of minorities if eventually the army that is sent to dismantle the militias on the one side and to create order is actually massacring in that scale.
Yeah.
That's a failure. But I still think that this failure potentially can be fixed, and that we need to fix these relations, because the broader interest that we should have is that for Ashara to actually succeed and not to fail. If Syria will succeed to mend its relations and to find a formula of coexistence and power sharing within its diverse society, almost 40% minorities, it will be a better neighbor for us and a better neighbor for the region. If the different parties and the role of some parties, and I think I can add some Qatar-related parties and Turkey-related parties that have played a role in creating and encouraging some of these militias, from their time in Idlib. That is not going to be a constructive role for the future Syria, because if you are creating this type of dynamic, which is the old part of Syria, which is the civil war, which is sectarianism, then you're going to encourage militias everywhere. Yeah. And if we realize that the Druze needs to have their weapons, and the Kurds needs to have their weapons, and Hezbollah now needs to have their weapons, and everybody needs to have their weapons, we're just going to have more weapons coming at each other. And we have enough experience in this to know that eventually some of these weapons will come back to also hunt us and get us into the war. It's not an easy, and it may not take a day or a month or even a year. But I would still say that we have an interest that this process will succeed. And part of this process is a joint effort to try to weaken these forces. There's a lot of homework that Ashara needs to do, but there may be some constructive things that we can do as well. And I think now we need to gather our senses back, even with the Druze community, and understand that if you really want to defend minorities in Syria, and if we really want to defend the Druze in Syria, we need to really work on deconfliction.
Thank you. And kind of looking ahead, I mean, moving slightly kind of on a tangent here, but kind of I'm really interested in reports that have been emerging on an agreement between Syria and Israel. A security agreement, some have called it as the wider joining of the Abraham Accords, which also brings me to the second question is, well, what do countries like the UAE, especially those parts of the Abraham Accords, fit into the talks that perhaps have been going on, perhaps have not? You could share your opinion on that, but could they realistically mediate between the two sides?
So let me start with the first part of the question.
Yeah.
Just days before the Suweida events, we were actually in the midst of an engagement and even negotiation process in Azerbaijan.
Okay.
These meetings followed a number of other meetings. Some of them were reported upon. Some of them have taken place here in the UAE. But following a number of indirect channels, we were actually created direct channels. And there was, and there still is, direct communication between the Israeli side and the Syria side. We just heard yesterday a report of that these channels continue with Minister Dermer's meeting in Paris with Syrian foreign minister. And there were other meetings, and I'm glad that these channels continue.
Okay.
We were on the verge of creating a new set of understandings. I would not yet call it the Abraham Accords, but I think that we were working, and I am familiar with some of the Syrian counterparts who have been working to create a framework of relations for the future that may be different than the one from its past. It's not easy to do, and it's not something that can be done in a day. But aside of security dimensions, which are critically important, as we have just seen in Suweida, we were also beginning to think of other types of partnerships and other types of collaborations. And within the Israeli and Syrian informal channels, which I've been very much a part of, we were thinking about how to open channels of trade and commerce and communication, and even civic society coming together, because in the past 15 years, Israelis and Syrians have learned to know each other. Yeah. In the time of the Syrian war, we hosted for medical treatment over 5,000 Syrians in Israel. I've had many Syrians break bread with me in the past 10 years at my own home in Jerusalem. And that meant that we had been working together to create ripeness for something different. Of course, it's not enough to work with those who agree with you. You need to also convince the others. And there are plenty in Israel who are skeptics, and there are plenty in Syria who are skeptics. And therefore, what we were going toward is creating a new framework of a security agreement that is going to be maybe based on the 1974 armistice, but it's going to actually be a bit broader than that. And an agreement that will enable Israel to ensure the security measures in its border proximity, and that will enable Ahmed Ashara to understand what also can be achieved in this regard. So the more efforts could be focused in other arenas in order to implement its own vision, and also give us some time and graduality, which is very much needed to build trust and to progress toward a better agreement. I think that the minorities in Syria, the Druze, the Kurds, actually can be an asset in this. They would like to see more partnerships. They would like to see more tolerance. Obviously, they do not like to see a sectarian Syria that will threaten them. So there are partners in this vision. And I think we would like to see this vision as well. If we'll feel that this vision fails, and that Syria again escalates into a reality of militias and ISIS-like types, and remember that Daesh, the Islamic State of Syria and Iraq, was established in the same area and placed its capital inside the Syrian city of Raqqa. So we obviously are not going to let this reality unfolds in front of our eyes. But if the trajectory will go to a different direction, I think more things can happen. And I think that Israel will actually be a partner for the emergence of a new Syria and a better future for our two countries.
And I think that's what everyone's hoping for. But I'll end with this question. Now, I think the key goal of prosperous Syria and a prosperous relationship between Syria and its neighbors is something that we can all agree on. And there have been challenges, many challenges that we've mentioned. Either it's been the strikes or internal control over different factions in Syria, or a sense of national unity, or various other challenges that may prevent such prosperity from coming to fruition. But in your view, what are the key steps that are necessary over the next few months that could reverse the course that has been taken over the past few weeks of escalation, of violence, of less confidence in a prosperous relationship between Syria and Israel, but also in a prosperous Syria?
Well, I'll answer this also relating to the second part of your previous question, which I did not ask. Okay. I did not answer. I think the most important piece here is first to embark into a process of de-escalation and mediation. And actually, I think that countries like the UAE can play a role. We need to bring the parties together. Israel is perhaps more involved than otherwise it would have been because of the Druze community. The Druze community of Israel and the Druze community of Syria are very much in touch, and I think we have some Druze in Israel who potentially can be partners for this agenda and can help moderate the Druze as well. Building trust is not an easy. After over 1,000 of your community members were some of them executed and tortured. Yeah. And that's not going to be an easy process, and it's not a process that we can easily control. But perhaps if we'll bring some more pragmatic and moderate leaders who understand that the future of relations and the future of security in Syria depends on arranging a different reality of security and engagement inside Syria, then we can contribute to that. I think we need to know that Suweida type of events are not going to be repeated, and they're not going to be the ones who will, again, be spoilers for a larger process. A little bit, if I may, just like October 7 has been a quote-unquote local event of a much larger scale that ended up spoiling other regional dynamics that were on the verge of potentially happening. I think we're looking now at Suweida as another example. But I think it's important for all the pragmatic partners in the region, and certainly the people in the UAE, to work together so that the spoilers and the radicals will not have the upper hand and will not lead it. Because eventually, if you will get the Islamists on the one hand and the separatists on the other hand, and those who will help them with these types of agenda and really works against Ashara, there's going to be a critical mass that works against his vision. And if his vision fails, it's not just he fails or Syria fails. I think in many ways we all fail. Yeah. So I think we have a joint interest that Syria will become stable, that relationships can be mended. It's going to be very difficult to speak about the broader issues before a real process of mediation, sulha, a process of reconciliation really begins and matures a bit. But if we're able to do that, we can use that as a key to the creation of a better order in Syria. It should involve a stronger local government, a recognition that the minority communities have a place in New Syria. I think they need to feel that that actually is the case. The security arrangements are going to build as such that they feel they're not going to be a threat. That is going to be much more done to distance, to punish, to dismantle all the people responsible for the horrible pictures that we've seen. Yeah. They do not have a place in the Syrian military, in the Syrian Ministry of Defense, in the Syrian security forces. And I think we have an expectation that something will happen on the Syrian government side to say this. And then we need to do our part and saying that we actually want to help this process of healing. These are the immediate steps, and then we can work to demonstrate that collaboration and partnerships can actually help build Syria further, can actually help and build Syria's economy. I think this country that just signed a very important agreement regarding the port of Tartus in Syria. Of course, for all of these things to happen, we need a degree of stability. We cannot build if there's going to be a militia that will come, a week or a month later and try to destroy it. So we need to make sure that stability is there. And I think it's the interest of all the responsible partners in the region. And that's what we need to do together in order to make it happen.
Well, thank you very much. I stand with you in this call for, key steps being taken for a more prosperous Syria, for a more stable Syria, for a Syria that can have a developed economy and be a responsible partner in the region once again, as other responsible partners are trying to help it stand back on its feet. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we can have you join us again. Thank you.
With pleasure. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thank you.